30. So I call to order this meeting of the Champaign County Board Data Center Activities Task Force. Could you please call the roll?
Rodriguez.
I'm here.
McRory McKay. Esri. Thorsland.
Here.
Rain.
Here.
Rice.
Here.
Sage.
Here.
Newell.
Here.
Okay, wonderful. With a quorum present, we can now move to the approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion?
Do we need to make an amendment? Thorsland is not on the agenda.
Yeah, but probably a good call. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so okay, so with that friendly amendment in mind of adding Eric to the committee members list and that he is present, can I get a second for?
Second.
All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Wonderful. We are now on to the approval of minutes from March 2023. I'm sorry, March 23rd, 2026 and April 13th, 2026. If no one's opposed, could we do this as an omnibus, so both at the same time? So I need a motion.
I move to approve both minutes.
I'll second.
All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. I can hear Jenny Lockshin yelling at me every time I forget to hit that mic, so shout out to Jenny Lockshin. Okay, so we are now in the portion of our meeting for public input. So this is an opportunity to address the task force, anything that is public facing, even just to weigh in, just register your concerns. We are all ears. So I have one so far, and that is Samuel Gerstein.
Hi, can you guys hear me? Perfect. Hello, my name is Samuel Gerstein. I'm an undergraduate computer science student at UAUC, and I'm a resident of Champaign. I am disappointed with how the Data Center Activities Task Force has been approaching conversations about the presence of data centers in Champaign County. This is ever more pertinent, as today we have a lobbyist from the Data Center Coalition, an organization funded by Google, Meta, AWS, OpenAI, Anthropic, as well as many other tech companies that would financially benefit from this data center at our community's detriment. There is no situation in which data centers get built in Champaign County and the community actually benefits. I find it hard to believe that Champaign County is betting on an experimental, unprofitable, and socially harmful AI industry to supposedly benefit our community. We already see existing data centers torture residents of rural communities, both physically and mentally, and derail last-ditch efforts to slow our response to the ongoing climate crisis, which will impact everyone. I was encouraged by the passage of a 12-month moratorium on data center construction, and I think that the conversations the task force is having are necessary. However, I beg this task force to not see hyperscale data centers as simply an eventuality that must be regulated. This task force should instead be focused on stopping data centers from coming to our community entirely and listen to its residents urging them to protect our future. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, I see no other public input slips. So we can now move on to communications from the task force. So again, we're not getting into a back and forth with people who have presented, but this is an opportunity to raise issues of public importance, keeping people informed, that sort of thing. Okay, seeing none, we can now move on to new business. I hope he's ready for us. So this is a presentation from Allison Lindberg, Director of Sustainability, and also Mayor John Lasich of the City of Aurora, Illinois. So again, this is informing, again, we are here for the purpose of issuing recommendations to ELUC on any kind of data center ordinance that we might draft, right? These are limitations. The basic question that we are entertaining here is, if a data center were to exist in Champaign County, what would we want that to look like? So we are taking in as much input as possible, and across our research, we found that the city of Aurora had a robust policy that we'd really like to hear from the architects, I guess, on their process and anything that they learned along the way. And I know that they have a presentation prepared. So nothing further to
Thank
do.
you. Can you hear us fine? Okay. So my name is John Lash. I'm the mayor. You see the screen?
Yes.
So, thank you. As the mayor mentioned, did not have any kind of regulations, no separate requirements.
It's not sharing presently.
Yes. We're good.
We'll iron out the technical short.
Thanks for data center. Great. So, basically, as the mayor had mentioned, we as staff, we were getting an influx of data center and warehouse development requests. We could not do anything to put regulations on our data centers without first putting on that for both warehouses and data centers, because data centers didn't even have a definition in our zone. Same time, because we were getting all of these requests, we also had some existing data centers that were causing some concerns and some issues with some of our residents. So we had concerns over noise, traffic that was mainly on the warehouse side, and then environmental impacts of data centers. And then privacy and AI concerns also were present. Just basically, why were we letting these data centers come here? We already had 5. Did we need it? We wanted to clarify first and foremost, make a distinction between data centers and warehouses, but then we also wanted to listen to the community, find out what their concerns were, and then do a robust research process to understand what existing regulations there were so that maybe we didn't have to reinvent the wheel. The city council did vote to approve a 100-day moratorium in September so that the staff could look at the language and try to address all of these concerns. Okay, so as the mayor had mentioned, we already have 5 existing data centers. And then when we put the moratorium in place, it went through a process where it took a couple of weeks. So we had an influx of data centers actually apply right before the moratorium officially went into place. That moratorium did include a clause that allowed for data centers or warehouses to still apply. They could get a hardship if they could approve, or they could prove that they had a hardship, and they could still go through during the moratorium if the hardship was met, if those requirements were met. For whatever it's worth, we actually did not have any data centers apply during that 6-month period. We did have a few warehouses. So let's go to the next. So basically, we listened to the data center requests and concerns from our residents. As I mentioned, noise was a big concern. We also had concerns about water, energy, and pollution. There were no requirements, and we didn't have a public engagement process for data centers either. So this was a big concern from our residents in the sense that if a data center was zoned as a warehouse, they would just go in and there was no city council process. And so these data centers were sometimes being built in people's backyard and they did not know that it was happening until it was already happening. So we had the pause, 180 days. The staff researched best practices and then wrote up the proposed language. We also included a survey online so that we could hear from our residents and businesses about what they thought about data centers. And we also held a listening session with our citizens. Then it came time to propose our actual new requirements. The first thing was that we had to actually create a definition for data centers because, again, we didn't have one at all. And we actually had to create 4 different pieces of legislation to have it work across all of our different zoning and building code and just general code of ordinances. And then our city council basically had to vote on these text amendments, and then they had to lift the moratorium, which expired by March 24th. If the city council did not approve these requirements that we proposed, we would go back to data centers being considered warehouses, and there would be no requirements for that. This was the basic process that we went through. I'm just going to take you through a little bit of the research that we found. Again, this was, in September that we started this. The first thing that we looked at was just to get an understanding of other places that had installed moratoriums, of which we found a few. We also were looking to see how some other municipalities had looked at data center development. And you may or may not know that Virginia is a big place for data center development. So we did do some research about how they've handled it, but they started tackling this issue a long time ago, whereas these data centers are already here and they're already coming. So creating a specific district for data centers the way that Virginia didn't really make sense, especially with Aurora, because we don't have a lot of just big open space left. We do have some, but not enough to create a specific district for data centers. So this is just a broad brush of some of the things we initially found. We do have a comparison of 16 different municipalities that we looked at. That's available on our website if you want to see in detail the granularity that we looked at. We looked at things like what did they do for zoning, what kind of definitions did they have, what kind of setbacks did they do. I'll tell you, nobody has all of the things that we were looking for. Nobody had something that addressed noise and water and energy and all of the other things that we knew that we needed to address. So essentially, we took a little bit from everywhere. This is just a thank you to some of the different people and organizations that we worked with. I put the residents of Aurora here because we had hundreds of people actually complete our survey. And the really big thing that was very helpful to us is that the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus created a data center task force of different municipalities in the Illinois region. And it also included a lot of people that are in the data center industry. And they helped us out by convening these meetings for about 3 months on different topics. And that was very helpful. And you'll just see a number of other entities that we talked to, including our utility here, including the different counties here. So, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, let me add one more thing. That Allison hasn't talked on. You see the American Civil Liberties Union there, the ACLU, and other data privacy act organizations. This was something that we believe is being discussed. We have pretty good evidence is being discussed at the state level. There's been several media reports that the data centers are trying to remove something called BIPA, the Biometric Information Privacy Act. That Illinois has relatively strong protections for residents because it may get erased out of Illinois. It's important to protect in Oregon, but also to let our state lawmakers know that residents felt like protecting people's privacy is a key component of what any data center regulation or ordinance should look at. I don't think our presentation focuses on this. I just thought I would call it out as another component, so you're aware of something being discussed in Springfield along those lines to get rid of it. I'll let Allison have that.
Yeah, thank you. That is a really important piece of what we got feedback on and that we did decide to include into our ordinance. I'll also just mention here the Electronic Frontier Foundation. They also helped us with some BIPA-esque language. So we did have some legal experts actually look at all the language that we were doing just to ensure that, it actually stood up. Another really good entity that we worked with was the Citizens Utility Board. We had a lot of concerns from residents about higher utility costs. But really all of these entities that are listed here were very helpful, and I'm happy to share this presentation with you afterwards, but and I also know that this is not everybody we talked to. So just to give you a little bit of flavor about what our residents were specifically concerned about. So this is a snapshot of our survey. We didn't even have it up for a month. One of the questions that we asked was, what are your biggest concerns about data centers and or warehouses? And the respondents were allowed to choose multiple things. And the top concerns about data centers were increased utility bills, water consumption and water quality, high energy use, air pollution and air quality, and noise. There are other ones on here as well, but those were the top 5 that we had. And then we also I think this is important for everybody to understand, but these concerns came from across the city of Aurora, not just those wards that our data centers are located in. If you can guess, the places where our data centers are located is 4, 10, and 9. Those are the ones that had the largest respondents, but the entirety of the city of Aurora has been concerned about this issue. This is also just a snapshot of some of the specific comments that we received. So we put together a package for our council of all of the comments that we received in summary from this public survey. It is also available online if you're interested. But really, what we were hearing is our citizens wanted us to ban data centers permanently. They did not think that the cost of the utility taxes that the city was getting, or the property taxes that the city was getting, or the jobs that you know, the first-time jobs, the construction jobs that were coming out of these data centers were enough for to put Aurora's future in jeopardy. So we didn't really get very many respondents in favor of data centers, but if you want to see for yourself, you can access this. All of the responses are available in this public survey summary. So now let's talk about the actual new standards that we came up with. So first, why we needed these new standards. So they do bring economic activity, but they also have significant local impacts. And as you probably know, if you've already been working on this, which it sounds like you have, data centers constrain the electric grid, they constrain the water supplies and the existing infrastructure. In nearby neighborhoods, we had issues related to noise, vibration, and then their visual impacts. And then we had a lot of community concerns about privacy, biometric data, and AI, as the mayor had mentioned. Whatever it's worth, we got a lot of comments saying we should ban data centers because I don't want AI. Now, that's not something that we have jurisdiction over, but this is a very big concern that people have. And I'm sure you have heard that AI is one of the reasons why the rise of data center development has increased so exponentially. Not all data centers use AI, and we understand that, but that has driven the influx of data centers. So essentially, we just needed predictable rules to help protect our residents and then also provide clarity for developers. So we were not necessarily anti-data center development here. But what we wanted was data centers, if they came here, to be good neighbors and to have as little environmental impact on the public as possible. Aurora also has a sustainability plan and greenhouse gas reduction goals. This high energy consumption and the water consumption directly conflict with data center development, so we're trying to help that align with those goals. So the package that we created is a coordinated regulatory framework. It governs siting, construction, and operations and oversight for data centers. It's designed for transparency, accountability, and legal defensibility. And as I mentioned, it's 4 separate ordinances. One of those ordinances deals with just warehouses or anything that is zoned M1 and M2, and that deals with vibrations. And then we have a zoning ordinance for data centers, a building code ordinance for data centers, and then a code of ordinances change for data centers. This was our timeline. As we mentioned, we started the moratorium on September 25th. We created an interim progress report to council at the 3-month mark, and we had a staff working group that was working on this and doing all of the outreach that we needed. We also were engaging stakeholders and residents, including the data centers themselves, and then we started drafting the policy language in about January. As I mentioned, we had that survey as well. On February 12th, we had a public open house where we revealed our draft recommendations for this policy language change. And then we had to go through a number of different committees in order to get this passed, including the Planning Commission, which is a citizen-led commission for zoning and planning, the RAP Committee, which is a city council committee, and then the Planning Commission again. Then we had to go to the Building and Zoning Committee, which is a city council committee. And then we had to go back to RAP, and then we went to Committee of the Whole, and then to City Council. And City Council did end up actually passing the data center regulations on March 24th with some back and forth. We're able to get all of this done with the data center requirements going into place starting March 25th. Just at a high level, I'm not going to read this slide, but I wanted you to see what our current situation had been before we passed these changes, which was that for noise specifically, we were getting a lot of concerns about the noise levels of an existing data center. And the Illinois Pollution Control Board is the one that sets these standards. However, they're very difficult to measure and enforce. You actually need a specific, special, thousands of dollar machine to test this. So we were having problems enforcing it here in our own city because it was something that the state was controlling. For water use, we didn't have any requirements specific to data centers. We didn't have anything specific for energy use. We didn't have anything for emissions except for what the general regulations in the state had set for their backup generators. So we had no local standards specific to data centers on privacy and AI. However, as the mayor mentioned, BIPA is in place currently in Illinois, but we've been hearing that they were trying to weaken BIPA at the state level or remove it entirely. And then transparency, there's no public comment required if data centers fell within the typical zoning requirements for those warehouses. And there was no ongoing reporting. So a lot of people express concerns over the fact that they don't know how much energy these data centers are using, or water, or anything else about them. So it's not just about building them, it's also understanding what they're doing over time and how they're operating. This is the main package. This is what you all were here to probably learn about is it's basically in 4 kind of sections. We wanted a transparent public process for new data centers. We wanted performance standards for new data centers. And then we wanted to ensure that we had a stronger grid and more resiliency for new data centers through renewables. And then last but not least, we wanted that transparent operations. And that piece goes for both new and existing data centers. We did get a lot of pushback from our community that they wanted all of these to apply to existing data centers, but we couldn't do that. It's just not legally feasible. So everything applies to new data centers except for that transparent operations, which also applies to existing data centers. So we changed our zoning ordinance so that we now have a data center definition, and all new data centers are conditional use. That means that a public hearing is required for all new data centers, and city council approval is required. There's also requirements now for public notice to be online on a website. It has to be published in newspapers, and it has to be mailed out to the nearby residents. We're also requiring a water study and a plan and an energy plan. And then we also are requiring a sound study and a plan. And then there has to be a second sound study done so that it verifies it meets the objectives of the plan that was submitted before the final occupancy permit. So if they can't meet the sound study requirements, then they don't get their occupancy permit. And then we go to the actual standards themselves. So we set our own noise limits, and this is different than what the state has. The state does not have them in decibels, which is what makes it hard to measure. So we set decibel limits that actually got lowered, which means they're quieter than we initially proposed from staff, and this is because of public input. So they're daytime and nighttime noise limits. There's also vibration limits for both data centers and warehouses. We also have an energy consumption limit of 1.22 PUE. And PUE stands for power usage effectiveness or efficacy, depending on who you ask. And that basically is the amount of power that is used for the building itself to do the cooling, because that's the biggest power usage for these data centers. So you basically take out what they're using for the tech in the building, and you just are understanding the percentage of how much is being used for the cooling. We also are prohibiting modular nuclear in our communities. Water use, we also did something similar to the energy consumption limit, where they have to meet a water usage effectiveness for efficacy. And we are prohibiting evaporative cooling. Evaporative cooling is the most water intense form of cooling, and is what the large data centers that are using massive amounts of water are using. Some data centers, we found out, are not using evaporative cooling for some of it, but they are using it for load shifting purposes when electricity rates get too high. So it still means they're still using a lot of water, and we're just prohibiting that type of cooling altogether. We also wanted to ensure that, they're using so much energy, but we wanted to ensure that some of this energy is either renewable or that it is not passing that high electricity rate onto the nearby customers. So we have an on-site renewable or resiliency requirement. Is 25% of the peak load for renewables or 50% of the peak load for 15 minutes for batteries. We do have an alternative compliance available if on-site is not feasible, and we will work with the developer to ensure that they can meet this requirement. But we also want to make sure that the intent of the requirement is met on our end. And then last but not least, the transparent operation requirements. We're requiring all new and existing data centers to report to the city their annual energy consumption, their annual water use, and they're required to do annual noise testing. The city is the one that will go out and hire a third-party tester, but it will be reimbursed by the data center. We also are requiring that BIPA be met in the city of Aurora boundaries, even if it's weakened at the state level. So we basically copied the requirements from the Illinois BIPA and put them into our own code of ordinances. We will be requiring that these data centers certify every year that they're continuing to meet this requirement. And then we also have some backup generator testing. It's limited to 2 at a time, and we have a continuous vibration monitoring requirement. Those are all of our requirements. Just for fun, these are how the different amendments were broken out in those 4 pieces of legislation. Just for you nerds that want to find the actual language, you can find this online at our webpage, but you'll see that it's called these 4 different numbers, and that's because they hit the different sections of our. In summary, we do believe that this ordinance reflects a balance of economic development, infrastructure protection, resident privacy, and addresses all of those concerns about sustainability. We recognize that these data centers have long-term impacts, and our residents really wanted something robust. And as I mentioned, we didn't see anything that was this comprehensive out there, but we did see some places that were doing little pieces of it. And then last but not least, just wanted to flag for you that there is a bill currently at the Illinois legislature called the POWER Act. POWER stands for Protecting Our Water, Energy, and Ratepayers. It is a more statewide approach to data center regulations, and there is a lobby day for supporting this bill on May 30th. And if you have any questions, we actually did a comparison document between what is in the POWER Act and our code of ordinances, and we're happy to share that with you.
Just briefly, I want to say that, as Allison said, in the moratorium phase, there was literally about 3 days as we moved a special meeting for the moratorium to council, and there were, I think, 5 data centers that got into the moratorium. One that wanted to just agree to work with us. They wanted to have an energy efficient, modern facility because they have a client who wants to comply and do whatever they can to address the climate crisis. And that developer is still working very closely with us after passing these regulations. So I don't think that the regulations are going to deter anything. As Aurora is still relatively attractive given our proximity to Chicago, and other tech industry and neighboring Ohio, and our infrastructure. The other thing I want to talk about was the need for state legislation and for other counties to do this is because ComEd has, and maybe as part of your task force, you can ask ComEd or Ameren, maybe whoever's down there, to address the power need. But up here, I worked in the nuclear power sector for a while, and the Exelon fleet and renewable energy they have online. It's like 6 nuclear plants. The closest one to y'all is down there in Clinton. Even though it's outside of the ComEd grid, it's one of the Exelon fleet, or now Constellation fleet. They produce 26 gigawatts of power collectively, along with some gas plants and the applications for new data centers over the next 3 years. They're projecting that will be an additional 30 megawatts of power, so more than double. And that's just the ones that they've received applications for. These things are popping up all over the place. So when a data center applies to ComEd, they have to lay down $1 million or more to tell ComEd that they're serious and that they want them to run the electricity out there. And I don't know what the Champaign County area has for power, but it's pretty significant. But this is why we feel that statewide legislation is necessary, and other municipalities or counties who want to take similar actions as we have, I think will send the message to Springfield that they need to act. So anyway, I just wanted to share those two components, that these regulations have not stopped interest in data centers in Aurora, and two, that there really does need to be a statewide effort. So we work very closely with those people who are trying to craft that statewide legislation to mirror some of the components, and also serve the interests of our residents. And I don't know if we've got too much time, but we want to make sure we're available for questions. I'll leave the here one specific slide and do that.
You're doing just fine. Thank you so much for your time. I would like to open it up to questions from the task force. Any brave volunteers? Yes, Deb.
I have a question about the difference between a data center and the warehouse. What?
So this is a zoning issue. We have different zoning regulations, and I assume that Champaign County also does have different categories. And so I'm new to the mayor's office. I was elected just under a year ago. Before I got here, they were processing data centers as warehouses because they didn't have a special category for warehouses. I'm sorry, for data centers. They didn't have a special category for data centers. So we needed to create that special category to talk about all the things we just got done talking about, and to make sure that it's a conditional use. Now, not all development goes through conditional use. This, we make sure that data centers went through conditional use, because if the data center is going near a residential area, it's really close, and they're going to have loud fans out there, we want to make sure that they're taking extra measures to reduce the noise pollution to those residents. So that's an example, but there's a number of things I can think of why it should be conditional use, and those are all zoning discussions that should be had with a zoning.
I'll just add to what we found in our research with different municipalities is that municipalities that have not had a data center come in yet, or maybe categorizing them as a warehouse, or maybe categorizing them as something else, like an office, or just general commercial. And all of those things, they just don't address the use type of what a data center is. So we basically had to create a new data center use type so that we could put specific regulations on data centers and not try to have them also go to warehouses, which it wouldn't make sense for a warehouse to have these requirements.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Hey, this is Andrew. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate both of you walking us through this, and it's so helpful. And I've been digging through the ordinances, of which I didn't fully understand until you clarified how all four of those operated. So even better. I did have a couple questions, hopefully not too technical. The numbers on power use efficiency and water use efficiency, how did you come up how'd you land on those numbers? So it was 1.2 for power and 0.2 for water.
Right. Yes, great question. So we did some research to find out what the average PUE and WUE were for data centers, and then we did some research to find out what was considered a really sustainable version of that. And if I remember correctly, the average PUE for a data center was like 1.6. I might be misremembering now, but we found out that somewhere between 1.1 and 1.3 was considered good for a PUE, and so we picked 1.2. And then for water, it was basically the same thing. What's interesting is that if you have a really energy efficient data center, you probably don't have a very water efficient data center, and vice versa. And so what we had to do was balance the two and make sure that we didn't make the WUE and the PUE both impossible to meet at the same time. And what we found is that we actually have a data center here that is meeting both of those requirements already. So we felt fairly comfortable with those numbers, even though they are on the very sustainable side of the spectrum for both.
And if you're not familiar with it, probably the three ways that they cool a data center is a closed loop water system, which we allow, an evaporative cooling system, which we do not allow. Both those are water and quiet, and the third is with a fan cooling system. Sometimes there's a hybrid version where it's got water.
Thanks. I have a few more questions if that's okay.
Yep, please go ahead.
So I've heard concerns about like both high frequency and low frequency noise, and I'm wondering, did that come up in your discussions? And if so, how do you feel like the single limit addresses those concerns?
Yeah, that's also a great question. So the Illinois requirements actually address all of those frequencies. They have like a 9 frequency of band that they do. It just makes it hard from a municipal level to actually do the enforcement ourselves, because we don't have the tools to do all of the, it's not a decibel reading, but all of the different octave bands, of which I think there are 9 that you have to test, and we just couldn't do it here. Basically, what this enables us to do is, if the data centers, we had a lot of neighbors that were coming to us with their phones and having readings on their phones about what the decibel limits are. And now they could actually put in, because we put those decibel limits in place, they can actually submit a complaint and say that they're out of compliance with that noise regulation. However, I will just let you know that the noise conversation, it was very intense, and some of these neighbors that have been dealing with these noise issues, it has been, you can tell that it's very affected their lives. It is a consistent droning noise that they have to deal with that never stops. And then the backup generators come on and it's even louder. We had also been hearing, and this is why we put the vibration requirements in place. Now, we don't have verification on this, but we had heard that some of the people, that they were seeing cracks in their foundations since the data centers came in. And, we, again, that's not verified. We don't have a way to verify it, but it makes sense that, higher vibrations of things, especially from those diesel generators, could generate something like that. So, I hope that answers your question. We weren't dealing with the high and low frequencies ourselves here, just because that's already been regulated. But I also just want to mention that that specific data center was not meeting the requirements of the Illinois requirements. So they were in place, but they were out of compliance with that. And as a local jurisdiction, we didn't have very much power or authority to do the enforcement as the enforcement happens.
The three changes we want at state level. One is, so we would encourage, if you're looking at some sort of ordinance, to do the same thing for simple testing. Proceed for simple testing matters. Second is, we believe there should be continuous monitoring of noise along the perimeter of the property. We believe that the state of Illinois Illinois should conduct a long-term health impact study to determine what that low frequency does to somebody's, as well as their hearing.
Can I ask a
That's
brief
it.
follow-up? And I'm wondering if, Eric, if you're going to ask something similar. Could you describe or explain a bit more about what enforcement looks like? So I understand there's annual reporting and third-party testing and, I mean, constant surveilling around the perimeter. What happens if you were to discover that consistently a data center were to be out of compliance?
So we have a number of things written into the legislation. And if I remember correctly, you know, I think we give them a grace period to fix it. And we give them a certain number of times to fix it. And then we do specify in there that there's fines, but we also at a certain point have the right to pull their occupancy permit, and then they will not be able to operate anymore.
It's a fine of $1,000 a day. The city council did debate increasing that amount, but we thought we would start with $1,000 a day so as not to be too restrictive. And of course, if we're struggling to get compliance, the council can move and increase that level.
Thank you. You want to continue, Andrew?
Yeah, I have a follow-up on you.
Let me add one more thing real quick. Additionally, the way that the test works, the sound test works, is they have to get a sound engineer to do a study before construction. Before they get occupancy, they have to get another engineering study to verify while it's running at capacity that it meets the requirements. And additionally, if they add equipment, which is happening all the time on data centers, let's say they add 3 new fans, they got to go through the whole process again. They got to do an engineering study and then do a post-construction engineering study to make sure that they're in compliance.
And Emily, you read that question right off of my question list, so thank you for asking that. My follow-up would be: what does your enforcement office look like? I mean, you're gonna have somebody reviewing these reports, and I don't know what Champaign's capacity is, but I would like you to share what Aurora's is like.
Yeah, I mean, this will go through our typical development services process that we have already. And it's, you know, it's a pretty robust process, but these are really big projects. So I don't think that this, as far as I know, we were not necessarily concerned that this was going to increase the amount of work that we need to do substantially. But basically, you know, they review it, they would present it. They do have to present it to the planning and zoning board and the or commission, and then our committee as well. So there's a number of eyes that would be looking at it and answering questions. I'm trying to think what else you just asked about in terms of enforcement. You know, we put a lot of onus on the data centers themselves. They're the ones that have to prove to us that they're meeting these requirements. So it's up to them. They have to hire an engineer to do these things, and then they have to demonstrate their compliance with it. And then I think the other piece about it, the enforcement. So there was a lot of concerns from our citizens that if the data centers are the ones hiring these experts, that you know, they will be not truthful, and they will side with the data centers. And so at least that last sound study is being hired, a third party, but it's hired by the city, but the data center has to be the one to pay for it. So that way it takes place of that. So I would say a lot of it is, you know, reviewing, but we're really handing a lot of it over to the experts, and the data centers are the ones that have to prove that they're in compliance.
That answer your question. It's our property standards, but everybody.
Yeah, we're going to mix it up a little bit. Eric.
Yeah, a couple questions from the nuts and bolts side of it. Do you have setbacks? Just a standard beginning setback Or do you just use the sound and vibration measurements to determine what's happening at the border of the property? Yeah, for example,
The setbacks, the way we articulated it in the legislation was that it would be from the actual generators and cooling fans themselves. So I would say normally you would do it from the property line, but we extended it. Normally it's 250 feet from the property line. We made it a larger number, 750 feet, but we made it from the source of the noise. But I would assume that your county and municipalities within Champaign County have a standard setback, and there's some state legislation about notification.
yeah, that's a start. And then I think it's a very good idea that you determine who the sound study people are and you just make them pay for it, because that's always been a concern for the public, that they're just hiring their own people to tell you what they want to hear. So just a little more technical, that 750 feet from the origin of the noise is to the first residential property or property line?
Yeah. Residential property line, yes.
From the line, okay.
Yeah.
I have a whole bunch of other stuff for later. I won't take up a lot of time now, but thank you for what you've
We're
given
happy
us so
to
far.
answer as many questions as you have, and you can also feel free to reach out to us directly. You can have a call, or you can send us your questions via email. We're happy.
One thing we could do is, I don't know if there's a chat on this thing, that we can drop a link into we have a data center page on our website, and that would allow you to filter through it. But what we'll do is we'll try and answer questions more succinctly than you get.
Okay, well then one more follow-up, the vibration measurement. I'm interested in what method you're using, how you do that. I like the idea that it's a continuous measurement, but is this something the city's setting up instruments for? Are you bringing people in to set these things up? Does the data center pay for it?
Yeah, it's all on the data center to do it, but they have to allow the city access to the information all the time. This is not my area of expertise, but I believe they have to have at least 4 points of vibration testing on site. But this is all in our regulations, and yeah, it's probably better to look at that. This would be in the one regarding the warehouses. Because we put this in for all new M1 and M2 properties, because on the warehouse side, we also have some customers that are having generators and things like that. And so we wanted to ensure that the vibrations were also being tested, not just at data centers, but
Yeah, this is Kevin. I just had a couple questions. The first, on your website, I was looking, and I thought it was 1,000 feet setback. Did it get lowered to 750?
I got it wrong. I got it wrong.
Okay,
it might
sure.
be 1,000 feet. There's 2 different setbacks. There's one that's for, sorry.
One is for residential, and the other was for commercial. Yeah.
Yeah.
Schools and
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The second question I had, it looked like 2 of the ordinances, the vote was unanimous. 2 of the other ordinances, there was one alderwoman that voted no. And I don't expect you to be able to read her mind, but I was just kind of wondering if you knew what the arguments were. Is it something that we should be thinking about, why she was voting no?
She is the ward alderperson for Ward 10, which has the majority, if not all, of the data centers. And so she has residents complaining all the time. What they want is they want a complete ban. So, she pushed hard to reduce the decibel levels. We tried to, we're balancing between getting threatened by lawsuits from the data center industry and, trying to meet the needs of residents and make sure that they have the peace and quiet they deserve. And So I think, I don't want to say why she voted, but, you know, I think that was it, was she had proposed a number of amendments that didn't, votes to move forward. Some of them were extremely restrictive, and that's the reason for her votes.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate you coming and speaking with us. And like I said, I just want to make sure that we're hitting all the bases. That if she saw something that the others didn't, that we didn't miss that too. Thank you.
Dirk.
Yeah, thank you so much for spending the time helping us with this. I mean, your work is really, really good guidance. Back in the energy requirements, there was one about providing 25% of your peak use. Okay, the one right after that, dealing with battery storage. I believe, if I'm remembering right, it was 50% of peak use battery storage. Okay, there we go. On-site battery storage, 50% of peak load for 15. Can you explain that a little bit? Is that just in case of a power outage or disruption? What does that deal, or why is that covering?
Yeah, so essentially, we were trying to strike a balance between giving options. So, you know, on-site renewables would be really great, but we also know that the state is incentivizing batteries right now. And then one of the concerns about having all of these data centers online is that if they're all running at the same time, there are going to be gaps in terms of the amount of energy that's available. And what that does is that drives up the rates for the customers nearby. So what we wanted to do was have some on-site battery storage available so that when there are those peak rates, that battery storage actually goes to the neighbors first. So this is not necessarily batteries that storage that helps the data center itself, because they use so much energy that it would be like impossible for them to find battery storage that would do anything for that long of a time. So we picked 50% of peak load for 15 minutes because that's still a substantial amount of battery storage. Did you have anything else you wanted to add? We did put parameters in there that says that the energy actually goes to the local customers first during times of peak rates.
Okay, thanks. The existing data centers you have, and then the ones that you, well, I don't know, I guess if they're proposed, you aren't, but existing ones you have, what kind of range in terms of megawatts do you have? I mean, size wise, that's what I'm looking at.
We have the slide.
Oh, actually,
I think we have a slide here.
yeah, go down to the next one. That's the property one. Go to the next one. Yeah.
Okay.
So this looks at the second column there. These are existing data centers that have been constructed. They're estimated megawatts that they'll consume. And I think this shows how much money the municipality would collect in taxes. You know, because there's a utility tax, which is called mud tax. So this gives you some idea. Obviously, you know, they can size these things to be 10 acres of data centers, and they'll eclipse this. Aurora is landlocked. Champaign County, I'm guessing, is not.
Okay, no, thanks. I was curious what kind of range size-wise that you were dealing with. So that's very helpful. So thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, and then to be clear, like, I think that that 90 megawatt one, they're going to have two other close to 90 megawatts, but those are still under construction. And the really hard part is that they've given us these applications, but they don't 100% know how much energy they're going to use yet. And some of that depends on whether ComEd can actually support their request. So that's just something else that we included in our ordinance, is that at the time of application, in order for us to really move forward with everything, they need to have it's a letter from the utility saying that the utility supports the project and can support the amount of load that they're requesting.
I have what I think will be a quick one before I hand it back to Andrew. So I'm hearing, I think the future of AI is uncertain. We hear a lot of conversations about AI being on a bubble. We also know that we don't yet have a state health impact survey. So I'm thinking about decommissioning. Do you have, I don't know, a plan in place? What does that look like?
Yeah, you mean decommissioning in the sense of if a data center is no longer a data center?
Sure. Or, I mean, we find you enough times, or they simply decide to shut our doors. What does that look like? I'm
Yeah.
considering like a barnacle, basically, just hanging around in Champaign County. So I guess could you give us a sense of what decommissioning looks like?
Yeah, that's a great question. We did think about that. One of the things that we're also requiring that I failed to put to the presentation is that we are requiring what's called a development agreement, or sometimes people call them redevelopment agreements, an RDA, for all new data center projects. And that will basically help us to spell out all of the things like decommissioning, like what happens if they don't meet these standards, that sort of thing. What we found from our noise issues with one of our data centers is that there's not a strong swift reaction that the city can do. But if we were to have something in a contract, it would help us to do things more quickly, especially because data centers themselves, for example, they may house something that is very important, like the internet, and it might be difficult for us to actually close them down, even if they're not in compliance with our regulations. And so going forward, it's now a requirement that they have to have a contract with us that explains all of these things, and that they understand that and agree that if they don't meet these requirements, then after, whatever the agreement is, we will come up with those terms. Then they have to, close their doors if they're not meeting these requirements. But for the decommissioning piece, that would also be in there. We did put in some requirements that if they're no longer a data center, they have to remove all of their equipment, they have to remove all of their backup generators. And one thing that we were thinking of is right now, a lot of municipalities, because data centers don't actually employ a lot of people, they don't have a lot of parking. But we were thinking if they're building these structures, we want them to, if they get reused, we want them to be adaptable someday for something else, and hopefully it's some kind of commercial use, and they will need parking. So basically, we are requiring a little bit more parking, it's called parking banking, than a typical data center zoning ordinance might, just because we're trying to think ahead.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
You again asked my question before I asked it, so good job.
Surveillance is working.
Okay, so then that brings me to my last question, which is, was there anything that you felt was important that didn't get into the ordinance for one reason or another that you'd want to talk about?
I think the only thing that I wish we could do, we couldn't do it with the time constraint, is figure out how to apply some of these requirements to existing data centers. And we could for operational things, and they can tell us how much energy they're using because we're not setting a performance requirement for them. And what we ran into there is it's basically a land rights issue, and it's a legal issue. We did the idea of maybe giving them a long runway, like maybe in 10 years, these requirements will have to apply to them, specifically for the performance requirements and noise requirements. But we just didn't have enough time with the moratorium expiring to really consider that going forward. So for me, that's the one still unanswered question, and I think it was an unanswered question for a lot of our residents as well. Our residents were not happy that we couldn't deal with the existing data centers and make them comply.
And that's more of a legal challenge, right? It's like if you build a house with 2x4 walls, and then we change the building codes and say now we require 2x6. Well, you can't go to everybody that's got a 2x4 wall and tell them they got to rebuild their house. So, it's just a very challenging legal problem.
So if from what I'm hearing from you, from your existing data centers, is the number one complaint seem to be noise that, from the residents?
Yes, that was the number one complaint, but we also were getting a lot of complaints about high utility bills. And that included water utility bills, which I don't know that there's a correlation necessarily for the data centers in our area specifically. We did see concerns about the water here in northern Illinois. The water table is decreasing. We have cities like Joliet building a pipeline from Lake Michigan because of the concerns about water. And so that was a big concern, but I think complaints, it was noise and then electric bills were going up. Our electric bills here increased by like 30% last year. Is it 25?
Yeah, it was 25%. They increased 25% in 2025, and that's the PJM power grid area. So I don't think that affects Champaign. I don't know what you guys had in the southern part of the state. And then I think they were scheduled to do 10% increase, but there's been a lot of pushback, and so ComEd is voluntarily to make the data center pay a little bit more upfront to address the infrastructure needs. There's two big costs on the energy side. One is, of course, energy generation, and then two is infrastructure to get that energy to the facility. So anytime with energy, you want to have it as close to the end user as you can. And the other thing that we didn't address, again, I don't know where you're at in your process, but if you were some of the other counties that did these ordinances, they set up sort of a data center zone, and it makes it easier for everybody because you can run your fiber there, you run your electricity there, and you say, hey, here's this big, 200-300 acres, whatever you're going to designate to data center alley, and that's what it becomes. But from an infrastructure perspective, it just makes more sense.
Any more questions?
Because Aurora's landlocked, that did not make sense. We just thought whoever's going to be the 10th ward alder person is not going to appreciate data centers.
Go for it. You're good. You can ask as many as you want, Andrew.
So you did not address, well, I guess, do you know where the data centers are currently getting their water generally? Most get it from the community water supply, so I assume that's what's happening. But you didn't address infrastructure costs related to that build out or anything like that in your ordinance?
No, we did initially, we wanted to put language in our ordinance that required the data center to pay for all of the infrastructure costs on the grid so that it would not go to the taxpayers or the ratepayers. But the problem with that is that they don't honestly know what that cost is per that data center because that's just not the way that the utility does their infrastructure rates. And so, and then also our legal team kind of came back and said, we just don't know how to write this in a way that's enforceable. So we were not really able to do that. And so that is one of the reasons why we also put the renewables or the resilient grid requirements in, is because if we couldn't make them pay for that, at least we could try to strengthen the grid with some local energy, that would benefit our neighborhood.
Sorry, just to clarify, I was asking about the water infrastructure side of things. So the cost to the utility of the pipes.
If you, again, we're going to put it out in the middle of a cornfield in Champaign County, yeah, you would probably want to pay for that. Infrastructure. The thing is what we did, the real intense water use is an evaporative cooling system, and since we just outlawed those or banned those, we don't really need to address that water use. If it was a closed loop system, yeah, it would use a lot, but it would also, kind of be a one and done, with a circle coming in. I think DeKalb County had, was it DeKalb or DeKalb had a pretty significant evaporative cooling system.
Yeah, the Meta data center there has, I think it's a combination actually. It's not as much as you would think, but it does use a substantial amount.
If you were to allow evaporative cooling, I would think water use is something you would have to address a little more stringently.
Yeah. Personally, I would suggest just outlawing evaporative cooling if you're concerned about water. Because they can really, it will be what we have seen in our research is that even though not going that way and using a closed loop system seems to be more popular now, there are data centers that are still proposing evaporative cooling, and part of that is because it's quieter. And they want to do that, and so you really need to make it clear that that's not an option. We've seen some municipalities have a data center proposed for evaporative cooling. The public came and had concerns about it, and then they changed to a different cooling system, and now they're not using evaporative cooling. I would just, my recommendation is if you're concerned about water, then just outlaw evaporative cooling. If you put the water usage intensity or efficacy in there, or efficiency or whatever, that will also help them have to meet that level. They probably can't do it if they're going to use evaporative cooling, but I think that it's just cleaner if you just outlaw it.
Any more questions? Okay, I believe that is all of our questions. Thank you both so much for joining us today. It's been super informative. I've got about 3 pages of notes, so I hear a little clap going on, so yes.
Do you have a chat that we could drop a link in, or should we email it to you? The other thing I really want to drop a link in is we have
A live feed.
Hold on, he's pulling it up. It's on near our city building.
City Hall.
Yeah. And we have a webcam, so you can see it live, and we're very proud of it. So there you go.
Love it.
That's what we're fighting to protect.
We are all Team Falcon.
Does that help with geese?
We do have some killer geese here. Well, okay, so thank you again.
Thank you for having us.
As far as comments or sharing things like that, I would email those to Kate, and she will send that to us. And that way, with your contact information, if we need to follow up or use the form that you've given us, we'd be happy to submit questions there. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Okay, do we want to take like a 2-minute break or before we move to the next one, or we? It is in person? Okay, great. So 2 minutes, do we think? Quick bathroom break? Or are we ready just to push on through? Push on through. Okay, I'm seeing 2 to 3 push on throughs. Okay, great. Let's pull up my notes here. Okay, so our next presentation here is from Brad, is it Tietz? Okay, wonderful. He's the Director of State Policy for the Data Center Coalition. Again, this is for our discussion to help draft our ordinance. Thanks.
It's on now? Okay, there we go. Good evening. I'm used to saying good morning or good afternoon, but my name is Brad Tietz. I am the State Policy Director with the Data Center Coalition. I oversee the Midwest for the DCC, but spent about 20 years working in Illinois government and politics and policy, so very familiar with everything we're doing here. It's been fascinating to kind of see how the rest of the Midwest is really approaching this topic. Some are, focusing on different issues, but The DCC is the national organization or association for the data center industry, so it's a fun time for us right now. But I will say off the bat, obviously you have a moratorium in place now. There are no projects being considered here right now, so my hope is that we can have a thoughtful conversation about how best to move forward here, because, and the city of Aurora pointed it out, not every data center is the same. They're all very different, and there are multiple subsets within that, and I can get into that here in a second. But so with that, historically, there's been two kinds of data centers, and they've been around for decades. What you have is the hyperscaler data centers. That's going to be the names that you all know, the Metas, Amazons, Googles, and Microsofts of the world. And they're going to build their own data center to process their own compute, right? But there's also what's known as multi-tenant or co-location data centers. And those are going to be data centers that build the building, secure the power, the infrastructure, and then lease out space from anywhere from 1 to 200 tenants, 300 tenants. And those tenants are going to range from hospitals and banks to governments and schools and small businesses. When you think about critical services and, like the hospitals will often tell us, like they can't have those systems or be curtailed or the load be, shot down because of the access to hospital records. But so there's other types of data centers too. There's edge data centers, obviously the kind of like the rise of AI. And, Illinois does not really have any AI data centers in it right now. For a wide array of reasons, but Illinois has historically been a very strong co-location market, primarily around the Chicagoland area, but obviously we're starting to see more projects proposed outside of that area. But and that was in a large part because of the strength of the Chicagoland economy. So if you look at communities like Elk Grove Village, Franklin Park, North Lake, you're starting to see more venture out, but out west, to the city of Aurora. But again, I just want to highlight the differences within the industry, because that's, as local officials, as you're thinking about it, and if you are approached for a project, one of your first questions should be, what kind of data center are you trying to build? Because that'll inform a lot of questions around power and cooling, site selection, all that. A study came out in January 2026 from JLL, but other studies have confirmed this too. About only 25% of the workloads occurring nationally right now in data centers are AI related. About 55% of that is for cloud computing. 95% of Fortune 500 companies are using cloud computing. And then what I did see a number recently, 91% of small businesses now are using some form of AI through their businesses now. But again, we don't really have that occurring from the data center perspective in Illinois. But again, I just wanted to flag that. So, when you're thinking about planning, what are the kind of three overarching priorities in building a data center? So one is going to be to provide a safe and secure space for the compute equipment. Another is going to be, to make sure the uninterrupted flow of electrons to the computer equipment. And then three, on the issue of cooling, is reliably rejecting the heat generated from the compute equipment. So, when you think about common designs that kind of apply to every kind of data center, one is going to be continuity of operations and reliability, and they're going to do that through a number of different ways. Obviously through backup generators, but their cooling systems, all these have redundancies built in because of the critical nature of the data they are storing. Increasingly efficient arrangement of racks and routers and switches. So, an interesting stat, it's a bit outdated now, but from 2010 to 2018, the use of data increased by about 550%, but the energy usage in data centers only increased by 6%. And that's because the old kind of antiquated way of how we used to store and handle data in separate buildings and whatnot, that was a very inefficient way of doing it. So when you cluster everything together and you think about the demand we are seeking as a community for digital services, that's what the data center is going to provide. So another piece that's becoming increasingly important is scalability and modularity, the ability to kind of move things around in the building based on who your customers are. And again, as local planners, that's going to be important questions for you all to ask. So, why are we seeing the increase in data centers? And Illinois has been a top 5 market now for a number of years. We're probably 9 or 10 now for a number of different reasons. But one, the average household now today has 21 connected devices in it. We're going to use twice the amount of data in the next 5 years that we used in the last 10. So, the demand again for digital services is going up. Obviously, I know that the economic benefits were spoken to a little bit there, and they acknowledged it, but not just, the underpinning of everything we do online today, but when data centers do enter jurisdictions, they do bring significant economic benefits. So in 2023, and we'll have updated numbers here soon, but Illinois' data center industry contributed or supported about 115,000 jobs in and around the data center ecosystem, added $10.8 billion to our labor income, about $20 billion to our total GDP, and importantly for a state like Illinois with property tax challenges, almost $2 billion in state and local taxes. And for 2024, actually that number is about $1 billion in property tax benefits alone. So, when you think about the Midwest in particular, Illinois, has been the top market, I would say. I would say we're getting surpassed now by Ohio, but, Virginia, the data center capital of the world, they're probably going to be surpassed by Texas here in the next few years, but Georgia, Pennsylvania, Arizona, California, all significant markets. In the Midwest, you're seeing significant growth in Indiana and Wisconsin, some in Michigan, but in Minnesota, but Illinois is kind of hovering, like I mentioned. So I just kind of put that out there as a level setting. So, what is the industry going to look for when they're looking at a site? One, is time to market and access to power. If you need to be closer to your end user, the customer, fiber connectivity, a low latency is going to be a critical thing. Access to clean, reliable, and affordable energy, climate and risk of natural disaster. So you're not going to see a lot of data centers in Hawaii or Florida, for instance. Land availability and cost, and then access to a skilled construction and technology workforce. So, that's kind of the basis for, how they're going to think about where they're looking at it. But I guess from the energy side, we're not hiding it. Data centers use a lot of electricity, but I mentioned how efficient the buildings have become. At a broader level, we've experienced as a country relatively flat, or in some cases declining load growth for the last 20 to 30 years. And this is the first time that we're experiencing load growth in those last 20 to 30 years in significant scale, which is being driven by the data center industry. But there are other uses that are coming on the onshoring or reshoring of manufacturing, electric vehicles. There's actually a study that came out in California. The EVs there are using more electricity than data centers. So CEJA, the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, was always predicated on the idea that, if we're going to retire fossil fuel plants, we have to add more generation and more transmission. And, I think the unfortunate thing is we're supposed to be at 40% renewable by 2030, and we're still hovering around 15%. A lot of that is because of PJM's interconnection challenges. But, that's just kind of where we are. And so, and I think to meet kind of this moment, for the industry, one, in the first 6 months of 2025, so from February 2025 to July 1 of 2025, 84% of the renewable procurements done nationally were done by the data center industry. That number was about 50% in 2024. We're entering into, PPAs, bilateral contracts with for nuclear power, again for renewable. Behind the meter solutions are becoming more and more common. McKinsey estimates that by 2030, 25% to 30% of data centers will be operating behind the meter. And we're investing in, all these things. So geothermal, long duration storage. Take a look at the Google project out in Michigan. It's a 2.7 gigawatt project, but on wind and solar and 100-hour battery, which is going to be the first of its kind using iron air technologies. So, I think the most critical part is, we're going to be investing in these things and trying to bring out as much generation as possible. But the most important thing is that, the impact to the other ratepayers. And so the data center industry is 100% committed to ensuring its full cost of service. So, and where that's being dealt with, I know the ComEd large load tariff was discussed a little bit ago. The transmission security agreements that ComEd has entered into with data centers, that's going to be $3 billion coming from the data centers to pay for transmission upgrades. But, there are national studies. Lawrence Berkeley National Labs, for instance, came out with a study and said that states that are actually seeing wholesale electricity prices decline in real terms are actually states that are seeing increased load growth from industries like data centers are actually seeing a reduction across the board for other ratepayers. And that's because the primary or the driving cost of electricity prices today is coming from the need to modernize and harden the grid. Edison Electric Institute, a national organization, came out and said that, 34 states across the country have actually seen reduced electricity charges, and actually said data centers are not the primary driver of it. But, Illinois, I would say that those studies all kind of point to one issue. I know we're in the MISO territory, but PJM, they all identify is an outlier, and on the capacity side, and we don't dispute that. But it's primarily, a planning exercise, because one of the biggest challenges that we're having here is the speculation in the market. So how many projects are actually coming to fruition? I mean, numbers across the country are going to vary from 20 to 30 to 50% of those projects actually come into fruition. But a lot of those projects are getting baked into the interconnection queue and being, basically billed as paper charges. So I think there's a much more focus needed to be on large load forecasting. Over forecasting is going to lead to an overbuild in infrastructure, and under forecasting is going to delay projects and strain the grid and undermine reliability. So, there have been proposals, obviously, in Springfield. The Data Center Coalition did propose at the PJM level, for instance, a voluntary bring your own generation proposal in exchange for faster interconnection. The consequence, if we were to do something like that here, of not bringing your own, is going to be you might not get power for a long time. And that's going to be, in and of itself enough to kill a lot of projects. So there are different solutions. The DCC is proposing them at the state level on how to meet this growing demand that we have. So, but I do want to. I can't understate how the speculation in the market is very real, and that's something we do have to figure out. On cooling, and I do think you're all rightly focused on that. I've worked on legislation pertaining to the Muhammad Aquifer for a long time and understand how critical it is to the region. But as I've worked across the Midwest now, I've also come to realize how fragmented Illinois' line of sight is into its water policies. We have over 1,700 water utility providers. There's not really a unified plan. I've been talking to the Illinois State Water Survey, and they're doing great things, but I think we need to figure out a better system as a state to better understand our water policies. But, the data center industry, can actually be a partner in this. So one study I saw, 1,500 data centers co-located with wastewater treatment plants by 2032. So they're investing actively in wastewater treatment plants, and they're actually helping rebuild aging water infrastructure. We're also uniquely positioned to drive the adoption of an increased use of non-potable or recycled purple pipe water. So one example, and there are other examples too, but in a community in California, 65% of the data centers there are using recycled water. And actually last year, the Illinois General Assembly passed House Bill 2391, which allows treated wastewater to be used for industrial purposes, not just irrigation like it had been done before. So, I think from our perspective, a better approach statewide to water is needed. Singling out one industry is not the correct answer. So, I'll kind of get to why data centers use water really quick. One, it's to dissipate the heat coming from the servers, but every data center is going to look at that differently, and it's going to depend on the workloads occurring as well as who their customers might be, especially for the co-location. But things like water stress analysis, humidity, climate, temperature, and the availability of water, including recycled and non-potable or reclaimed sources. So, to the point that was made from the city of Aurora, there are inherent trade-offs when you are thinking about cooling. So air cooling is going to tend towards higher energy use, while liquid and evaporative methods typically require more water. So selecting a cooling technology therefore becomes a matter of balancing energy consumption and water usage. But I do want to stress not every data center even uses water. Some are air cooled again, but that's going to require more power. But there's also what's known as free air cooling. So in a climate like Illinois, you do have data centers that are leveraging the outdoor air temperature for a large chunk of the year, and then leveraging liquid or water cooling solutions for a few weeks during the summer. Data centers are just one of several industrial water uses throughout the economy. So globally in 2025, data centers consume less than 0.13% of industrial water use globally, and less than 0.01% of the total water use globally. So McKinsey came out with a study a few months ago. Data centers currently account for less than 0.1% of the total water use across the U.S. And in many regions across the U.S., data centers use water less than 5% of the year to support operations. So there was a study that was conducted by Bluefield Research, and what that study showed was and that was analyzing data from the U.S. Departments of Energy and U.S. Department of Agriculture. Nationally, data centers in 2025 used approximately 39 billion gallons of water, which sounds like a lot. But that actually equates to 1/7 of the water used by the city of Chicago that year. The food and beverage industry used 533 billion gallons of water. An estimated 2,500 billion gallons of water was lost to leakage in the water system alone. So, context matters. And actually, Elk Grove Village, the data center capital of Illinois, I would say, they just did an analysis, and a 200,000 square foot data center there, on average, is using less water than laundromats and car washes in those communities. In Virginia, there was a study that came out that's found 83% of the data centers there use as much or if not less water than a large commercial building. So, there are data centers across primarily the suburban region, because there are not actually operational down here yet, but a couple. So there's one using 6,000 gallons of water, actually less than the corporate headquarters that used to occupy the site. Another in the suburbs is going to use about 140,000 gallons of water a day, but only for about 3 weeks a year. Otherwise, they're using the free air cooling method I spoke to. Another in Grays Lake is going to use about 5,000 gallons of water. There are others, 22,000 gallons of water, 23,000 gallons of water, which is going to equate to normal use. So, how is this happening? The industry is becoming more and more efficient by the day. So, and I know you spoke to it earlier, but closed loop systems, evaporative cooling, direct to chip cooling, liquid immersion, dry cooling. There's a number of different innovations, and our ask is always, if you are thinking about mandates on certain kinds of water practices, don't just limit it to one technology. That technology might be outdated here in the next couple of years. So, that's kind of what I wanted to speak to. There are a ton of other questions. I would say on the point that was made on BIPA, the industry is not seeking a repeal of BIPA. Actually, in 2023, lawsuits started being filed that were including data centers to BIPA lawsuits for simply storing the data on behalf of customers who may or may not have violated BIPA. And it's created this significant legal cloud over the state. So with that, I'll pause. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you again for your time.
All right, so we are open for questions. Yes, Kevin.
Thank you for coming today. I appreciate the information you're giving us. I was wondering if you could expand a little bit more on you were talking about agreements that could. I didn't really understand what you were talking about. Agreements that could help keep our power bills from rising.
Yeah.
If you could explain that a little bit better.
So increasingly across the country, you're seeing what's called large load tariffs, and there's different utilities are structuring them differently. But actually, Ameren announced a few weeks ago they're going to propose their own large load tariff at the ICC here in the next few weeks. Some of the big components, though, to it are going to be significant upfront deposit fees. So it used to be $1 million, and now it's going to range from anywhere from $10 million up. For the engineering studies, things like that. Minimum demand charges, and you're going to see that range from 75 to 80 to 85% for most utilities. And what that means is, even if that project does not come to fruition, that company still has to pay for 85% of the cost that it was asking for. But that infrastructure is going to still be built in many cases and could be used by other ratepayers. The transmission security agreements, those are going to be the cost attributable for any kind of transmission upgrades. Those costs are not overseen by the ICC. They're overseen by FERC at the federal level. So you need a separate kind of approval at that juncture. But again, I think there's maybe 10 or 11 TSAs that have been entered into now with ComEd, and equaling over $3 billion. So I think the balance that needs to be struck, and it's a complicated process that should always be dealt with at the ICC, but what is causing the cost? And we're actually seeing in some states that are experiencing significant population growth, some utilities are trying to assign costs from the increased population growth to the data centers. And so again, it's all about kind of sorting out who's going to use electricity in that infrastructure, if that makes sense.
Thanks. I have a question. It's a broad one. You said that one of the key components for a data center is a skilled construction workforce.
Yes.
So I'm interested in if you can point to any examples that you feel are particularly meaningful in which you were able to work with our unions,
yeah,
right, to create a data center. In what ways was it remarkable, and over what period of time?
Yeah. So. And the Illinois Data Center Investment Program that provides the sales and use tax actually requires the project labor agreement for that project, which has been in place since 2019. But I'm not really aware of any data center projects, and I can't speak to every data center project, but at least our members, they are always going to use union labor in this state. And I mean, it's been fascinating. When there was a study done 2023. And that showed about 11,000 to 12,000 union jobs at that point, construction jobs. It's risen, quite considerably, since then. But, I think the point that often gets lost here is typically when a trade is on a project, they will be on that project for 5 to 6 years, sometimes even longer, or travel with that, company to another site. I was talking to a gentleman a couple of weeks ago. His son started on a data center project in 2017. He's still on that project. And actually, the company and I was looking for another site, and they've asked that firm to go with them. So, I know that they're often classified as temporary, but I'm not aware of too many jobs that are considered temporary if they end up being 5 to 6 year, 7-year jobs. So it's been an important partnership, and I think the other piece to it too is there is a significant labor shortage, in this. So, a couple of years ago, we worked with the governor's office and the General Assembly to secure funding for data center curriculum at the community college level. So the city colleges of Chicago, as well as the College of DuPage, have active programs, but other community colleges are working with them to try to figure out how to replicate that. Because, the jobs that come out of this, again, I mean, you can get a certificate and come out making 100,000, plus a year from these jobs.
Thank you. Andrew.
Hey, Brad, thanks for coming down and
Good to see you.
Telling us about this. Yeah, we testified at the water
Yeah.
hearing in the House, last week or 2 weeks ago. So question for you, the numbers you were quoting on water use, you gave various examples of data centers. How big are those projects in terms of megawatts, and what cooling technology were they using?
In that, I don't speak to, or I can't speak to because I don't know.
Okay.
I imagine they're closed loop. or some other form. But, I know that I believe the 140,000 one I spoke to that operates only uses water for a few weeks during the summer. I do believe that is a hybrid. So you're doing kind of like the free air cooling model with some kind of, evaporative cooling. I mean, the challenge that you have here is water is a much more effective way of cooling than air is going to be. And, for some of these chips now that are being deployed in these servers, the intensity of that heat, water is the most effective way to efficient way to cool them. But yeah, so I mean, that's my understanding. But again, I'm not, some of these data centers in a state like Illinois will use free air cooling, but then if they're in a state like Arizona where, the water challenges are significant, they'll commit to air cooling. But again, then you're looking at more power.
And then I have another question, if that's all right. So you talked about how data centers in Illinois are not AI data centers, or at least predominantly not AI data centers. Can you speak to like Cyrus 1 in Springfield that was approved recently, or the one in Joliet? Are those the bigger ones we're seeing? Are they AI data centers, or are those
They're built to hopefully, serve an AI data center, but they oftentimes do not have committed end users yet or tenants.
So we don't know for those two, or at least you don't know for Springfield and Joliet.
But I mean, typically for projects of that size, that's what you're looking at. But again, that project's not going to proceed if they don't have a contracted end user.
Right. And what's the cutoff? Like, when does it? If there's a size cutoff typically for AI, is that like the bigger ones are all AI, and then the smaller ones are doing this like running the internet and that kind of stuff? Is that?
No, I mean, the cloud data centers can be pretty big too. I think the interesting thing that is going to happen over the next few years is, right now you're seeing this build out of AI training data centers, and that is going to transition at some point to what's known as AI inference, and we're already starting to see some workloads of that happening, obviously, across the country as AI is deployed. But, in the next 3 to 4 years, AI inference is going to overtake AI training, and that's going to look like a whole different data center. That's going to, it's going to need to be closer to the end users for latency and fiber purposes. They can use older hardware. They're not going to use as much power. It's going to look more like, a step above the data centers that have historically been in a state like Illinois.
And just to attempt to translate, AI inference means the AI, when I do my Google search and it gives me the AI result, or when I put a search into Claude, that is not training the model, that is just running the model.
That's correct.
Whereas like training, they're sending they're using the data center to power their model, sort of training them from probably California or wherever the company is based.
Yeah.
Oh, you made the comment about fragmented policies regarding water use around the state.
Yeah.
And the need for, I mean, were you suggesting or advocating the state needs to take over managing, our water policies?
No, but I do think more visibility is needed across the board for more, I think, productive conversations, because like we've been looking at, and Andrew knows this, the Illinois Water Use Act of 1983. Which requires reporting for any withdrawal from a direct ground source of 100,000 gallons in a 24-hour period. I think, but it does not apply to water utility customers. It does apply to the water utilities, but not the customers themselves. So we're actually looking at ways to require reporting for all industries. Not just data centers. So again, the state can take a more holistic approach to understanding what sources really are not advantageous for industrial growth versus which ones could sustain that. But that's I think it's part of a bigger conversation. And again, by kind of just singling out one industry, I don't think you're really going to get to the challenges that you're trying to address here.
Okay, so you weren't advocating for, the state managing and not letting local.
No. I'm not going to get into that part of the debate, but I do think more visibility from the state is needed, and probably some kind of better planning.
I was going to say I'm going to preemptively call on Eric, but he's raised his hand.
preemptively. I preempted myself anyway. A couple of things. You have really laid a whole lot of numbers out there really fast. One of the ones that kind of punched me in the head was you said that 91% of small businesses are using AI, but is that because 91% of small businesses are using a product that AI gets jammed into? I can run out in the parking lot and I can decorate all your cars with a bedazzler, and then I can ask you to support bedazzling, but you didn't ask for it. I think a lot of people in our public comment were very adamant that they don't need something to read their email, which is frightening in itself because it's reading your email. I don't need it to answer my email. You can see where I'm going with all this. So sometimes I worry about the statistics that you're vesseling or that you're gathering are unduly inflated by the fact that AI is being stuffed into everything, like stuffing in a turkey that maybe you didn't want it in the first place. It's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. It's blinking in the corner of your Google page. It's here, it's there. And all of that contributes to this AI industry's ability to say, oh, well, but everybody wants AI because AI is being used all over and all this. Go back 5 or 6 years ago, and this was not a thing. It was a thing we survived just fine without. I went to the doctor. They knew about my records. They could tell me that, I owed them $47 to look at my tonsils. And now, they say, well, we need AI, we need AI, we need to do this. Andrew points out, the difference between what's happening right now, this massive use to train things like Claude to give us bad answers about things. And, at some point we'll deploy Claude and their bad answers now, not as a training model, but as the permanent bad answer. I appreciate where you're coming from. I think that if we put you in the room with our public input a few weeks ago, you'd probably have a less than enjoyable evening.
I'm used to that nowadays, yeah.
And you're probably used to that because you're down in the sausage making area in Springfield a lot. But I worry about that, and it reminds me of Mark Twain. We go way back, right? There's lies, damn lies, and statistics.
Sure.
And so we have to be careful how we interpret these statistics. And I think the real gist of what we're trying to do with the ordinance here is to deal with data centers in an ordinance management way, but the overarching implication is that we're being told that it's going to come, that you have to have it and that you need it. But what I hear from everybody who voted for me in District 7 is they don't want it, they don't need it, and they have a real genuine fear about electricity rates, about water use, about noise, about vibration. Aurora is dealing with it. I have a bunch of stuff that I'm going to spit out when we get into the next steps discussion because I won't be here for the next meeting, so I'm going to load you guys up with a bunch of stuff. But I think you did a good job presenting from that point of view what's going on, but I think we need to step back and say, these are great statistics. It's wonderful if a data center is super efficient, but if it's your third car in the garage, it really doesn't matter because maybe you could get by with just one.
I have one more question. I think it's you raised that. Okay, let me think of how to phrase this. So you mentioned no committed users, right? That you build something. I think that, okay, the average constituent voter in Champaign County imagines you build something, you build a McDonald's, you build a Topgolf, it gets built and that's what it does.
Yeah.
Right? Could you explain what you mean by no committed
Well, and
use?
typically, ideally, if you are looking to build, you have a contracted end user. I think it gets back to the issue of speculation, and not to the projects that were spoken to earlier, because they have the ability to secure those kinds of end users, and they've demonstrated that across the world. But we are seeing a number of newer developers, newer companies try to get in on this rush, right, or on this boom. And I was talking to a gentleman. I was introduced to him, and he's been in commercial real estate. He was able to secure some land, and now he wants to build a data center. And he calls me, and I get connected to him, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm going to go ask the utility for about 300 megawatts of power." And I was like, I don't think you know what it is you're asking for, because that's a significant request. So it's like, but that's all getting baked into things like the interconnection queue when those requests are made. So again, we need to, at the RTO level, things around verification of commercial readiness. Have you built a data center before? What has your success looked like? So, that's, again, to your question though, is, a lot will have, a committed end user, but a lot won't either. So, and those projects won't get built if they don't have an end user because they just can't financially sustain that.
Okay, so just to put it in my own words then, to make sure that my understanding is correct, it's not the same as building McDonald's and McDonald's comes in. It's you build the data center, and ideally you have an end user who would then use that.
Yeah, or on the co-location space, which again, I don't want to lose sight of, those, it's kind of like a hotel, right? Where you build the space and then you lease that space out. Most of those now are going to be at less than 1% vacancy, which I do think speaks to some of the demand happening, in the industry right now. But you might, like in terms of your load ramp or your electricity use ramp, you might plan out a 5 to 6 to 7 year plan where you're anticipating, 50% occupancy and then 75 and then 100%. But the goal there is to, build it with enough scalability and modularity to make sure you can kind of service the customers that you might need in the next couple of years.
Okay, thank you. Yep, Kevin. Oh, I'm sorry, can we do Deb first? Yep.
I just want to ask your background. Are you a lobbyist for the data center industry? I just don't understand.
Yeah, so I advocate for policies that, for the industry. But obviously we're in across the Midwest. But I have worked in Illinois for about 20 years. I was in the governor's office. I was on legislative staff. I was at the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce for a long time. So, but I've worked with the industry maybe going back to about 2016. It was a different period, for the industry. But then I joined the DCC about 6-7 months ago officially. But I've worked with the organization for about 6-7 years now.
Thanks.
Kevin.
Yeah, I have a quick question. And I know this is getting long, but just real quick. We had a discussion at one of our earlier meetings about what constitutes a large data center. Is it, we were talking maybe like square feet, 10,000
Sure.
square feet, or is it megawatt usage, or what, in your opinion, makes a data center large?
I mean, the industry measurements always can be based on megawatt threshold, and different states, different utilities will have a different measurement. Some are at 50 megawatts, some are at 100. But I think thinking about, from a local planning perspective, again, it gets back to the question of what kind of data center are you talking to? There are data centers that have been around in the city of Chicago that no one's known about for years, right? But if you're talking to a data center that's looking at a large cloud or AI type data center, that's going to range from 100,000 to 1 million square feet probably. But if you're thinking about acreage, anywhere from 200 to 700, 800 acres typically. Some are bigger, but most of them are not like that. But again, it gets back to what kind of data center are you working with?
Thank you.
I just wanted to touch on what Emily was getting at. So if the data center, they build it and they want to find customers, they would kind of know they're a co-locator then if they don't have their customers. But an AI data center that presumably has to be buying the graphics cards from NVIDIA to be
Yeah.
doing like it's a materially different, and it has to be cooled to cool these graphics cards that are running at a lot hotter, a lot faster, a lot more power. So like the infrastructure is fundamentally different in an AI data center versus a just like running the internet data center.
An AI training data center is going to be significantly different. An AI inference data center is going to look a little more like the kind of historic data centers. But yes, you are correct in terms of the, like, which is why, again, if you're talking to a data center, I think understanding kind of what their business model is first and foremost is most important, for local planning.
So we could be looking at wave 1 of data centers. I mean, push. Is that what I'm hearing? Or
No, I mean, like data centers have been around since the advent of the computer, and like I said, Illinois has been a large data center market. I mean, some of those data centers that are in Aurora were built in 2005. So, we're in a new period now. A lot of it, our members will say, is to meet the demand they're seeing. But it's going to be something that we all have to kind of figure out together, which, again, I mean, there's a moratorium in place. My hope is that, our organization and others can work with you all on policies that make sense for these communities.
got it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay.
Any other questions, concerns? Okay, I think we're all looking at the clock here. No, I'm not saying that we're done here. I know we got other business.
I was going to tell you your mic was off. So.
Oh, okay. No, I got it. Okay, so that wraps up our new business. So we are now on to other business, which is the date of the next meeting. So that is June 1st, 2026. I know that we advertised that this meeting would be about water and wastewater. I do just want to echo something we said at the last meeting, right? We're going to have to be flexible as far as scheduling goes. We are kind of at the whim of when these experts can address us, right? And so we're going to have to roll with it. But we are going to try to, as much as possible, keep the focus of next week on water and wastewater. Any comments, concerns about that? Yeah, Eric.
Well, just more in general, in our packet, we were asked to sort of answer a question about megawatt per square foot. And the two options that John gave us were the 0.0024, which I favor. It's the lesser use, and the other was the 0.0036 or 36 megawatts. So I think we should give John and staff that guidance at some point tonight.
Can I just, I'm just going to move us then to next steps. I think that's what we're reaching for on the agenda, and I know we're all ready to reach.
And I have a bunch of other stuff because this will be my last meeting and that I'm done this week, that I'd like to throw out there, and then perhaps I'll come haunt you as a person in public comment in the future.
I'll just simply say I have no chair's report, and then we can now be on next steps.
Okay.
Go for it.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry I'm jumping in, but I also haven't had dinner yet, so I'm hungry, as is everybody else. So the things I thought, the cooling water and the power consumption tonight, just some interesting statistics that I have. Even if you have direct-to-chip cooling, if you have secondary cooling of the heat generated by the direct-to-chip, a lot of that is done either by air or cooling towers or makeup water. There are a lot of closed loop, and I think we should lean towards things like closed loop in our ordinance. But we need to require some things to put some specificity on that. There's something called two-phase cooling. It's how your refrigerator works. You take a liquid, you let it evaporate, it cools things, you return it to liquid form, and it runs in a loop. And you take the physics, see, I'm in physics, to do some of the cooling. One of the things I think we want to avoid is this doing a secondary system. First of all, evaporative. We heard from Aurora, we heard from everybody, evaporative cooling is not a great idea. But there are some that use closed loop, but then they bring it out and they cool that heat from that and what they call cracks, or computer room AC, which is just a bunch of AC running all the time. One of the big concerns we heard about Aurora was the backup generation. And you should see in their ordinance now, they can only test 2 at a time. If you look at the Springfield Data Center, there's 4 buildings. Each building has 109 backup generators. So that's 436 backup generators. Typically, a backup generator gets tested once a week, right around on campus at 6 o'clock in the morning, like I do, going to work on my bicycle. And why on earth am I riding a bicycle in the snow if the rest of the world is going to use all my electricity anyway? But I like it. It's good exercise. You'll hear the generators getting fired up at different buildings, different days of the week. I know their schedule now, unfortunately, because I've worked here too long. But a 1 megawatt backup power generation uses between 70 and 80 gallons of diesel per hour. That's 1 megawatt. That introduces 22 pounds of CO2 per gallon, or about 1,800 pounds of CO2 per hour. To give you an idea, again, that's 1,920 gallons if you're powering a few. 43,000 pounds of CO2 in an hour. There's a thing called Beyonce, which Andrew knows about, right? And then you're a big fan of the singer too. And this is bring your own clean energy to the site. And one of the things I'd like to propose in talking about that is you saw that the Aurora mandated 25% on-site renewable and battery energy storage systems. I think ours should be higher than that because I think one of the big problems that we see always is that rates go up when these come in. It would happen if we had any kind of big user. If we stupidly offered the Bears a stadium and we turned all the lights on, we would see all our rates go up to supply that. 50% on-site renewable and battery energy storage systems to do that. And I like Aurora's model where that's there to help the peak load for not the data center. The remainder of the power, and this will never fly through committee, but the remainder of the power can either be more on-site or off-site dedicated renewable power. So you want to talk about a lot of work. We've got a lot of, I know people worry about the loss of farm ground to solar farms, but right now we're less than 1% of all the farm ground in the county with all the proposed solar farms that we have. Let them put solar that feeds them somewhere else. Let them put up, oh my God, wind. None of the electricity for data centers of any kind, once we get to this 10,000 square feet, should come from or be supported by the ratepayers that are around there. If I want to build a McMansion somewhere and I want to put it on a flag lot with a 1 mile driveway on it, I don't ask the township to come and put in a road back to my flag lot, and I don't ask them to plow it in the wintertime. If they need more power driven to their door, then of course they should be paying for that. Water use should be as close to zero after startup. With on-site wastewater treatment. Closed loop systems are wonderful, but it's not water. It's not just water we can then throw into the sewer. It's often glycol. It's got other things in it to keep the biology on it. That has to be treated somewhere. They talk a little bit about pairing with wastewater treatment plants and doing some effort there. That sounds like something that maybe could be explored. But we definitely don't want to wind up with a use somewhere where we're bringing in makeup water and then we're also producing a big waste stream of possibly untreatable wastewater. What happens to all that? You can't just throw glycol into the sewer. No, absolutely no tax incentives in Champaign County. We can, I think, put that in our ordinance, but absolutely none. And as much backup power as possible, not fossil fuel, which goes back to BESS, or battery energy storage systems, or other ways to do backup power. They talk about this ability that we can't turn it off. We can't let it go off because, we'll be without Claude for a few minutes. They're going to insist that they have 24/7 power, and it doesn't matter what's going on in the world. The other night Monday night, we all went in the crawl space of the basement. Again, power went out for people. These data centers are not going to allow that to happen. So they're going to have some sort of backup stuff. The idea of burning 18,000 or 80 gallons per generator per megawatt per hour is appalling right now. If you think about it, it's probably appalling to the data centers too when they're looking at the price of diesel as it is today for reasons not of their own making. So those are a few things. I probably, even though I'm leaving the board, will probably still send things to my friends in planning and zoning as this moves through because the internet that we have that existed for a long time now works really well at letting me see what is happening here in Champaign County. So that's all I have for now, and I appreciate you giving me the time.
Love that. So, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, there's one thing that I just want to respond to you real quick. The water treatment plant, that's not at all what happens with that cooling water. It doesn't get dumped out. There's not a treatment plant treating the water. The water is in the piping. It's a closed loop, so it stays in there with the chemical that's in the piping. When we install the system, we put the chemical in the pipe with the water, and it stays there. So it doesn't
Right.
get dumped. It doesn't go down the
I have
drain. It doesn't-
about 7 closed-loop water systems at work that cool things like my RS compressor for my helium liquefaction system. And there are times where we have to take that fluid out and waste it because we have to do either repair work or it's reached the end of its useful
Well, you
life.
should never dump it out. You should be saving it and putting it back in. So
It
whoever
depends
you
on
have
its
doing that,
quality,
you should
yeah.
tell them to save that and pump it back into the system.
Yeah, but we're talking a massive scale of that, and there's going to be laws.
Yeah, I know. That's why they don't want to do that, because that costs a lot of money to
Yeah,
just
I
dump that,
understand.
because then you're putting water back in, you're putting in chemicals. I just need you to understand that is not correct.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay.
it does go somewhere, right?
I'm going to pause us so we can focus this portion of the meeting, and then we can continue this. Does that sound all right to everybody? Right? Okay, so when we started this, or I think last time, we wanted to use this portion as kind of a download, right? Things that we would like to see in the ordinance, right? And things that we want to return to in our later meetings. So that's, I thought Eric's notes of what he would like included was a good fit for this portion of the meeting. But if we'd like to continue, if we feel like that's a good use of our time, by all means.
Well, just, it doesn't last forever, whatever it is. Nothing lasts forever, right? So there is a moment in which the system will have to be replaced. I know data centers claim it's 15 years, or they claim it's really, really long, but something happens.
Right, and you take it out and you go, it gets put into a tank, it gets taken somewhere where they can reclaim that, but it doesn't just get dumped down the drain. That's not good practice. It's not
And that's
good.
not what I was proposing. What I was proposing.
Well, that's what
is
you
that
made it
our
sound like.
ordinance addresses what happens to that when it ends its useful life. It's like the decommissioning that Emily talked about. We've done this a lot with our wind and our solar. Decommissioning agreements are a part of the ordinance, and I think our decommissioning has to address some of those things too.
I'm just saying that was misleading, the way that you were saying that. You're misleading the public.
Okay. All right. So a couple things that I would like to note. Let me think here. Let me get back on track. Something that hangs heavy in my mind as we have this discussion is the example, and maybe I'm saying this wrong. I've only seen it in writing. So Dynergy, right? So one of these coal plants that builds in Illinois, and there's plenty of examples of them across Illinois. They built these coal plants and then they left them. They did not have a proper decommissioning. Now we have plenty of pollution from these coal plants. And we didn't have much of a way to hold them accountable for that, right? We're still facing the consequences of stuff like coal ash depositories. So that's something I do want to think about, and I don't want to lose as we're talking about data centers, is the plan to decommission. I do think the visual of a barnacle, right, on Champaign County is something that we want to keep in mind, so again, we return to it. And I would like something in writing, not just in writing, but like a thoughtful, I guess, addition to our ordinance on decommissioning, and at least a conversation on it.
What are we asking renewables to do?
Well, the decommissioning for solar farms and wind farms is removal, but you don't have these 1,400 feet by 100 foot wide buildings that you're trying to decommission. I mean, I don't know how you would decommission a building 1,400 feet long and 100 feet wide. What are you going to do after you remove that building? Is someone going to farm that land? And the other thing is our ordinance distinguishes between adaptable and non-adaptable structures. A data center is eminently adaptable. It's just a matter of who else needs a 1,400 foot long by 100 foot wide building. And the other thing is that's probably going to be in our rural area, our rural areas, these huge buildings. If they ever stop being a data center, what are we going to allow out there in the rural area? That's a question I actually don't know how to answer.
Can I ask, like, if we addressed something similar with any, like, what is the scope of a county's decommissioning power, or how do we, what sort of tools do we have to consider, end of life in an ordinance?
I mean, how do you put teeth in it?
Not just teeth. Like I don't even know what it is. I mean, okay, so the data center. So we've got a building. The data center company goes out of business for one reason or another, and maybe they take their stuff. Maybe they leave it. Maybe we have a provision for like, yo, you got to take your stuff. Although if it's chips, it's probably still valuable. What happens?
How about like the DART building? I mean, what was, what ordinance was for that building when they left?
That's a great question. What we do with the wind and the solar is they have to remove things like John said, and obviously, and when they propose their decommissioning agreement, they factor in things like what's the scrap value of the tower for a wind tower, what parts will be resold, what parts are waste, what happens in that case, with the big mushroom of concrete. That is that they have to go so far down and make the land tillable again, but they leave that. We have this big building, right? Probably they're going to take everything out because there's value to, all the equipment inside. Maybe we need it instead of that to build, an environment where people live because it's 150 degrees outside all the time because of climate change. And maybe that's what happens to these big buildings. But the building itself is probably going to stay. So in the decommissioning agreement, maybe, or in the ordinance itself, the building, Aurora talked about parking, right? You do have this big thing out there now, right? But they put like 5 parking spots in because they don't have that many people that are in the data center. They made this parking bank where you had to make it so that if it turned into a recreational center or something, there was provision, at least in the layout, to make it a usable building for some other use, right? And that would include things like how many bathrooms are in the building, or the plumbing for bathrooms. What is the remaining HVAC look like when they take out all of this big monstrous electrical use? Is the building a building that's a viable building for some other use? Maybe it's grain storage in the future. Maybe, we back trucks up full of potash and keep it out of, the rain, but we got to keep it dry. Is the building going to be useful, or is it going to be so purpose-built that when the bubble bursts or the boom is over, or when they become degenerative AI would be my term for it, when they're done training and they don't need all these data centers anymore, does it just become, some place where bands film post-apocalypse music videos in front of because it's a big giant metal building falling down in the middle of, Tolono or something, or out in the fields. So that could be built into the ordinance. How we make that look, that's the hard part. That's why P&Z staff asked for 12 months, because it takes a lot of work to come up with something viable for it. But I think that needs to be in there, from the nuts and bolts of what would go in or come out of the building, what would happen to the equipment, the things that supported the equipment, and then the property itself. If the renewable mandate that I dream of is that they have to have 50% of their power come from renewable, you've got a building and a big solar farm. So hopefully they leave the solar farm. Maybe we want to tell them they have to leave the solar farm because the grid goes both ways. It's just a wire. I'm making it very simple, but, then we're doing an additive thing to the community, right? If suddenly we have no data center, but we have 25 megawatts of power generation during the day on a hot summer day, then, then that's part of the decommissioning, right? You have to leave the things that supply the grid. You have to take the things that nobody wants or that you sell off. But that all needs to be kind of put into this. And it's, a big, complicated ordinance. And John's over there, and I can see his soul leaving his body. There just is no smile there. So, yeah.
Yeah, cut that out right away.
But I think that needs to be in there and that's if this is this inevitability, which I will forever be the person who doesn't think, one, it should be told to us that this is inevitable, two, that it is inevitable, and three, what useful thing can AI do and what useless thing is AI doing for us? And we all pick on AI because it's a big pain in the neck right now. There are useful things it does, Mammography is one of the things that benefits from AI. It just is able to detect things that other things do. But, making Lego movies about the president being a jerk, is just a big waste of energy and trees. We know he is anyway. We don't need a Lego movie. Or some of the evil things that it's used for, I researched some of my things, and unfortunately now, like I was talking about, it's jammed into, I just want to do a Google search. I keep turning it off, and it keeps giving me the AI answer. So the first thing that's on my screen is the AI answer. So I ask a question about, what is immersive closed loop, and I just killed like 5,000 trees, to get the answer of it. And I feel terrible about it, but they keep forcing it upon us. So that we can't put in the ordinance, but certainly we can put in things to protect the main things that Andrew's been talking about the entire time. The ratepayer, the water, the noise, the vibration, and the electricity. Just the general environmental impact of just one of these places.
Anybody else? Andrew.
I was just going to say, I agree with what Eric said, but I wanted to ask about process. I guess I never quite got how we were doing it at the CCS one. Are we just kind of, is this how it works? Like Eric throws ideas out and you guys are kind of listening, and then at some point, John goes home for a long time and comes out with a proposal that we then review, and then how can I help the process? I'd like to say, let's ban evaporative cooling. Are we cool with that? Is this how we do it? I say, I would like to propose that the ordinance contains that, and then we hash it out here. I just want clarity on process, so I know how to come back to these meetings as productive as possible. And when you hear, so Eric did a bunch of homework. When you hear that, are you taking notes? And I guess I'm asking you because I think you're going to write it at some point. But clarify the process for me a little bit, whoever.
At some point, I hope we do start looking at draft ordinances, but I'm not guiding this task force, so I don't know when that's going to be asked for. I am working on it in the background, and I can bring it forward whenever anybody wants.
I would like to see, it would help, for example, we're doing water next. I think not only do we want to have speakers, but we want to kind of have a place that we're looking at first too. So if you want to, and I know you actually have water in a draft already, and maybe you've developed on, I assume you've developed on that draft since then, or maybe you haven't, whatever. Yeah, I think that would help make this part of the conversation more productive. And almost if we talk about water, have our good discussions, identify questions that we have. If we bring in an expert, like some water people, I gave you some names, we would know what to ask them because we are looking at the ordinance in front of us, and then we'd come up with more questions. It's an iterative process, but I'm just curious. Yeah, so that's, I guess I would encourage I would love to see drafts as often as possible. I would love advice on how to give you feedback on those, if that should be something I give feedback at this meeting. Yeah.
John, I'm assuming you had time to, did you look through the whole Aurora? Their whole thing, okay. Did you, and I know you're not here to offer an opinion on this is what we should prioritize, but did you see anything in there that we can't do that? You know, that absolutely will not work for us?
Well, the BIPA, the thing that's similar to BIPA, we can't do that. We don't have that authority.
A lot of the Aurora one we cannot do. They are a home rule municipality. We are not. So we can definitely, use it as a framework, but there are going to be large chunks where the answer is just no, we can't require that.
Okay.
We have no authority. It's not relevant to us. It's not important. Like, it's just not something that we would be impacted by in the way that a municipality would be. So yeah, there will be large portions that are not relevant.
Okay. I mean, I didn't know as far as using that for a guideline, but that's, then someone have to point out the areas that we just can't use that, or we would have to come up with our own workaround or whatever. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to make the first move, copy and paste over everything from Aurora that we can as a starting point. And I'd be curious to what, besides BIPA, I mean, I think the state is our defense on BIPA. I don't know what having it at a county level would even mean. BIPA is the privacy law for anybody who isn't following the acronyms. But what else do you feel like is really like, yeah, we can't do that kind of thing? Just curiously.
Could we also see, I don't know, in the next meeting or perhaps before that, we could see, I don't know, a draft that highlights portions that we cannot do with that home rule? Does that get what you're?
Yeah, I mean, or let's just copy over anything that we have from Aurora, and you can highlight what isn't copyable. I mean, obviously you can't just copy it, but for example, I like the water use efficiency number. I think between water use efficiency and banning evaporative cooling, we get to many of the concerns I would have. I'm curious about power use efficiency as well. Those were interesting. I liked the noise stuff. I liked the vibration stuff. Like that sort of process was good. I mean, I could go through the things I'd like to bring over from Aurora as a starting point. I do think because it's city, there's things we want to think about differently. Like, for example, the parking thing. If we're contemplating a rural data center, I support making sure it's reusable, but maybe the parking in Aurora is different than what we think about for we're going to have this giant building out in a farm field. So anyways, that's sort of what I think would be great is like, let's dig in on Aurora, pulling what we can over and hearing from you all about what we can and can't pull over would be a good start for the next meeting for me, at least.
I think we can, bring something in writing to start reviewing at the next meeting. Even if, again, as long as everyone fully understands it's completely draft form and it's to generate conversation, it is not proposing this is what the ordinance is. It's to get us moving in the conversation. And we would be relying on you to communicate that to people that are talking to you about this, because what we don't want is the public to be saying, well, you've already written it and the task force isn't done. Right.
Yeah, we can mark the record that I've requested draft ideas on things to actually chew on, because I think we just won't make progress really. At least that's how I think. I'd love to just get in a Google Doc with all of you and be doing edits and stuff. That's how I work, but I guess that's not how counties work.
We can get to that place. So.
Okay, so listing other things to return to as we're, again, drafting this ordinance. I guess the way that I saw these conversations going was to note things that we want to return to as we draft this ordinance. I think looking at guides and things like the city of Aurora, for example, what other counties are doing without home rule, I think could be a good space to start. And that's what I'm imagining how it's worked in the past whenever I've worked on something like a project labor agreement, right? Start from a draft and you amend.
We have been reaching out and there is not much to pull from.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But we are continuing to ask.
On PLAs?
Huh?
On PLAs in particular?
Just county ordinances. No, we have a PLA, county ordinances regarding solar.
So it could be.
data centers.
So at our very first meeting, right, John did circulate our existing ordinance. That could be a place to ground some of our comments and work through. But it's good to know that there's a scarcity of examples of other counties. But I think, yeah, okay, the other thing that I just wanted to note, and I know this is, I guess, less organized than I wanted to, but maybe that's okay. I would like to revisit at some point the fine conversation, right? They listed 1,000 per day. I'm wondering, we can't do that, can we? Okay. Oh,
The state
my world
limits
just
us
got really dark.
to 500 a day.
500 a day? That's the limit for us?
So walk me through, we've got a data center that has to pay a $500 a day fee to do whatever they want. Or, well, that's the fine, right? You said the fine we can limit is $500 a day, right?
That's a fine and it has to be imposed by a court. We don't start handing out $500 fines.
Right, but so walk me through, we've got a non-compliant data center, the neighbors are all complaining, this sounds awful. And so we start logging those days, sure, and then we bring them to court and we say, well, it's been, God, that's not even gonna pay for the fees. Do we have other compliance measures? Like, how do we get somebody into compliance? Can we shut them down? Can we do what Aurora said and shut them down if they are out of compliance for too long?
That's possible. Be prepared for a big fight if you're going to try to shut it down. But, and we wouldn't shut it down. We would go to court. We would discuss it in court. We do everything through the court. We don't shut people down. It's the court that shuts people down.
And is that true in Aurora too, or do they have different powers because of home rule
I
municipalities?
assume it's much different in Aurora, but it's still in Illinois. I don't know. I'm not that familiar with municipal authorities.
Right.
There's a huge difference just starting off between a municipal and a county. The authority levels are significantly different, and then when you throw in home rule, it gets even wider.
So basically, unless the state constitution explicitly allows us to do something, that's our lane. If it does not, then we cannot do it.
So just walk me through, it's been a year, the data center's been out of compliance for 365 days, neighbors are complaining for 365 days. What happens? We go to court, and then we get 365 divided by 2 times 500 fines, or times whatever. We get like a couple $1,000s in fines, and then ask for injunctive relief and ask the court to shut them down, or like it all has to, basically it gets into the legal system and we get whatever relief we can get from a legal system. Okay, oof.
My brain just melted. Okay, so can we also add that to our agenda, revisiting that discussion? That seems like a pretty pertinent one. Probably along with the home rule, what we can and can't do.
I opened this can of worms, so maybe, do you think the Aurora is there so little of that that's applicable to us that maybe we don't even want to, I don't want to make you go to a bunch of work trying to adapt something that just doesn't apply to us, so.
I'm using the Aurora as a model in the work that I'm doing back at the office. I think there's a lot there we can use, but it all needs to be considered. Do we want to go that far? Do we have to go that far? But we can do a lot of it.
I have another question, sorry. I was thinking about what the cities are up to. Champaign County, we're talking about data centers that exist outside of any of the cities in Champaign County, right?
Well, no, it would just be the home rule cities, right?
No, any city has its own zoning, and we're not doing anything in any city. We're only talking about the unincorporated area.
So even like a village that's adopted our planning and zoning?
There are no more villages. Well, Foosland is the only village that has adopted our zoning, so I don't think Foosland is going to be a hotbed of data centers, but.
Yeah, I'm just, I guess, thinking about it from my perspective, if we need to start, if the community should start talking to the cities about what data centers might end up within city limits that they should protect, but unrelated to Champaign County conversation.
Okay, we're getting close to 9 o'clock, which is, county board territory. Yeah, all right. So with that, I'm okay to wrap up our discussion on next steps. Is there any burning desire to say, no, Emily, no, you are wrong? Continue the discussion. Okay.
Is the agenda for next meeting, sorry, I see the people moving.
It's
Is the
okay.
agenda for next meeting, are we going to contemplate a draft, or are we doing wastewater? Are we going to do a little bit of both? Like, I do think a steady flow of experts is valuable as it educates our process, but I would maybe like to spend more time in this part as we go along so that we can discuss more.
I agree. I think we can have a more structured next steps discussion, right? Where we add inputs, maybe 1 or 2 presentations, and we add a time limit. Does that sound good? Stairs. Okay. Does that answer your concern, Andrew? Okay. Okay, so with Andrew's question, I believe that we have exhausted our next steps discussion. I now move to adjourn this meeting. Thank you for coming.